Hi, so welcome everyone. It's another edition of the Live Well podcast for the Grow Health platform. I'm delighted today to be talking to Ali Houston, who I've met once and spoken to a few times. He started off life as a chef in high-end restaurants and then moved into physics and engineering, as you do. With declining health in his late 20s, he decided to combine his interest in science and catering to found the amazing Paleo Canteen, and to share the power of paleo and low-carb eating with other people. So welcome, Ali.
Hi, Jen. Thanks very much for having me on.
You're very, very welcome. I loved your YouTube, which talks about your own sort of journey with sort of health and mental health. I thought it was incredibly powerful. And I was wondering, you know, in terms of that journey, your personal journey, where do you feel you are now? If 10 out of 10 is, you know, where you really feel you've kind of nailed that down for yourself, where do you feel you're up to now?
It's probably around 9. I think, you know, we all have days where we're like feeling under par and we're not quite sure where it comes from. And sure. I kind of started experimenting with food to make myself feel better in probably 2015. I think you mentioned my sort of potted history, and I just have one small correction, which is that actually I was front of house in
I did wonder actually, yeah, because it said you worked in high-end restaurants, and I kind of translated that into chef. Oh, so you were
yes,
you were organizing. And
I never really cooked anything when I was a teenager. My mum's a good cook, and I used to have things like frozen microwave doner kebabs. That's the things I would make for myself. That's the level we're on. Dreadful. And even worse.
But you probably had them about midnight as well, I guess, because you'd be working till.
Yeah, well, this is it. So when I started working it's a place called Regano. It was my first job in Glasgow, which is the oldest restaurant in Glasgow, and it's kind of decked out with like stucco and Cunard mirrors, and it's all Art Deco stuff, and very fancy kind of fish seafood restaurant. And I had my mind blown. I was like, well, what is this? It's amazing. And so that was kind of my introduction into that kind of food world, and you know, it kind of changed my attitude, and then I started cooking, and you know, I was sort of swallowing up anything by Jamie Oliver, who I thought was really accessible and whose cookbooks I really loved. Of course, you know, his is Italian stuff mainly, so it was all pastas and that kind of thing, which I loved, and I would make the pasta and all the rest of it. So yeah, anyway, but even though I wasn't a chef, it started me down the route of that kind of high-end cooking, and I always made friends with the chefs because, well, one, they would give you nice food, two, they would tell you things, you know, so I got all these amazing tips off these people who I thought were kind of rock stars.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. But in terms of the scale of how I feel, fast forward to, you know, 2014, and I'd started a PhD in physics, and I didn't feel good at all. So the sort of overriding problem was I had this dreadful brain fog, and couldn't, you know, I knew that I was, you know, I had some intelligence there, and I just couldn't access it. It was the strangest feeling. And alongside that came feelings of anxiety and low mood. You know, I've never been diagnosed with depression. I was actually diagnosed with ADHD, but that's kind of one of those broad terms that catches quite a lot. So you could probably find that if you get diagnosed with that, you could get diagnosed with a few other things as well if you really wanted to, or if you found the right psychiatrist. Yes. So I wasn't in a good way, and I was struggling with my weight, and I was a little bit confused about it. I'd go to the doctor And, you know, with the best will in the world, they would say, kind of eat less, move more. But it doesn't necessarily work like that. And I did go a sort of calorie counting route where I would just eat more or less what I was eating already, but less of it. And
you weighed out the frozen kebab and had less of it.
Well, by that stage, I think I was eating a lot what I thought healthier. So it would be things like baked potato with tuna mayo and salads and stuff like that.
Chicken salad, yeah.
So all good. I thought this is going to work, and I lost weight and I felt better while I was doing it because I could see the results. But the problem was when I got to the weight that I wanted to be, I started to just get super hungry, and I would eat the same stuff. It wasn't like I was binging on bad stuff. It was just that I seemed to not be able to eat the right amount, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And I found it all coming back on.
How your brain, and it's crazy how that can override and really drive the hunger and the cravings, and that because it's in that very sort of primitive part of the brain, you can't control it almost. You can almost kind of, you know, you don't want to do that, and yet it's like a kind of driven behavior, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a slave to it. So I kind of was a bit confused with it all. And looking back now, I almost can't believe that I hadn't made the connection between eating and all the rest of the problems, because clearly being overweight is a problem with eating. That's so glib, but somehow it is. Mm-hmm. And then with the mental health issues, I kind of didn't know the connection, but it makes so much sense because, you know, literally 100% of your brain is made up of the things that you eat. And so, I mean, there might be a small percentage that's, you know, environmental factors, you know, like if you're ingesting, I mean, heavy metals or something, lead, what you're breathing in, but, you know, almost 100%. So, but there's this disconnect between, you know, what people are told to do and what actually works. So I hadn't reached that point yet. And when I got into the PhD, I would say I was probably around a 4 or a 5 in the scale of happiness. I was, you know, unable to access, you know, the kind of intelligence that I knew was there somewhere. I felt down in the dumps. I felt anxious. You know, it really wasn't good. And I shared this with my professor, Ken Strain, and I knew he'd healed himself from chronic fatigue syndrome (ME) by changing how he ate. But I confided in him, but I had no kind of expectation that he would turn around and say, you might be able to positively affect your health by changing how you eat. I just thought, oh well.
Oh, amazing. And he's a physics professor, presumably.
He's a physics professor. His story is amazing. So
amazing.
You know, he was in his early 40s and was basically collapsing if he, you know, tried to walk anywhere. He couldn't get out of bed. Wow. He was told in his early 40s he probably wouldn't work again, and he kind of didn't accept that answer and went researching and started reading books like Gary Taubes and other people and blogs and so on. Yeah. And he thought, well, it looks like if I go low carb, then it might be that it could help. And 6 months later, he was running 10Ks again.
What a guy.
Yeah. So really amazing story. But I fell into the trap of, I think a lot of people do, where they hear the amazing results that low carb can provide for specific ailments. And I thought, oh, well, that's just good for chronic fatigue syndrome (ME). There's no pattern. There's no underlying explanation. There's no kind of like base like metabolic,
Yeah.
like
Underlying process.
Underlying process, exactly,
Yeah.
which affects all of these. And depending on your genetic luck, will manifest as chronic fatigue syndrome, or obesity, or whatever it is, or brain fog, like I
migraine,
had.
which we've talked about before, haven't we? Migraine, however you want to say it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but he actually said to me, "Listen, it sounds like this could be a number of things. I'm not giving you medical advice or anything, but why don't you check out, this blog, that blog, PubMed, and look at these specific searches, and just read for hours and hours, and then see what you think." And I think if anyone does that, reads those blogs like Hyperlipid, or the stuff that Nina Teicholz or Gary Taubes, or Diet Doctor, or Mike Eads, or any of these people have written, or anything that David's written, and don't turn around and say low carb is about as healthy as you can get, and if you have some ailment, it's definitely worth a try.
Yeah.
And I don't think you've read it right.
There's very little downside, isn't there? I'm kind of trying to think of some, other than having to learn to feed yourself differently.
Yes.
Yeah, there don't seem to be any major risks as far as we can tell.
Exactly. So I came to that conclusion, and Ken was kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, so did I. And I started in probably early 2016. It would have been kind of March time. I was going on a trip to the States to do with the physics PhD, and I thought, well, I'll try it on holiday. So I was just eating like steaks and almonds and stuff like that, and salads, and seeing how I got on. And it was like an overnight change. I'd had this dreadful heartburn for years, where I had to sit up in bed, and it stopped me from sleeping half the time, and that just went away within like 3 days or something.
Yeah.
And I still don't have a proper explanation for that. I think a lot of people find that, and it might be something to do with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It might be something to do with something else, but I don't care. The clinical results are clear.
Yeah.
And
a lot of our patients said, we were only saying on Monday night, we had one of our patient groups, and David was asking people to list all the different conditions that in the group of about 20 people had been improved. And lots of people were saying about acid, they used to get terrible reflux, and that does go away quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And after that, it became like a kind of rogues gallery of ailments that disappeared. And I started to document it all, because I thought, well, this is kind of amazing. And I would slowly move up the scale of how good I felt. So if I was at 4 or 5 in 2014, and then 2015 I dabbled with paleo, but it wasn't really until I hit low carb in 2016 that things started to fall properly into place. And I went up the scale. So, and I would then kind of, I think a lot of people move down this route where they go a kind of, I don't know if dirty keto, you might call it, or loose keto, where you're just focusing on keeping the carbs down. You're still eating lots of, maybe milk and cheese is an issue for some people. I know that I, in the end, pretty much cut out dairy protein.
Yeah,
so
me too.
Sometimes I still eat double cream. I'm developing an ice cream at the moment, which I think is delicious, and I eat it regularly.
I'm sure that'll be very popular.
Well, fingers crossed. But I think I've shot up the scale from maybe a 4 to a 7, and then it's been tweaking it since then. And I'd say I'm at a 9 now, and I think it takes a while sometimes for certain things to right themselves. You know, I think certain tissues have different half-lives in the body. So, you know, you can switch your diet overnight, but it doesn't mean that, say, your brain health is necessarily going to be rapidly different. You'll have more insight into that than I do, but
I'd
you know,
say that's definitely true. I mean, I remember when we used to work with patients who'd had any kind of nerve damage, we'd always say, like stroke, for example, you continue to improve for 3 years because nerves grow very slowly. So, I mean, that's just one example where, things that are neurological can sometimes take some time.
So, neurological, and the other one might be things to do with cartilage, where it can take years to see, you know, those kinds of improvements. But I'm at the stage now where it really is minor tweaking, and even things like viruses. You know, I posted something a few weeks ago saying to people, because I bore people stiff with all the low carb stuff, because they're kind of where I was 5 years ago. They haven't connected the dots yet, and that's fair enough. I think you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, and I've realized that evangelizing isn't necessarily the best way, and just quietly you know, sharing your experience is the way I've found that people, because I've been amazed when I bump into folk who say that they or someone in their family has benefited from eating paleo low carb, and I had no idea they'd even listened to any of what I was saying online. But
I think people love they love an inspiring story, and if they can identify in any way with your story, then they're more likely to kind of have a go. And like you say, if you see those really rapid, you had results in a couple of days, that's so motivating, isn't it? If people will just have a go and then they see some results.
Absolutely.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing about the rapid results for me is crucial, because I think a lot of people try it, and a lot of my friends have tried it off the back of me suggesting it, and they've noticed huge differences. But when they get the carb creep and they start eating more again, it's really just a weight thing for them. I mean, maybe there's some IBS stuff, maybe there's some brain fog stuff, but it's not as sharp as mine. Whereas if I have a plate of sweet potato chips or something, then I might be up all night with this, whatever it is, heartburn or esophagus pain. So it's just not worth it for me.
Yeah.
The
motivation's really, really clear. It's kind
really
of
clear. It's night and day. It's the same with sugar. If I have sugar, then I can get kind of anxious immediately. I just don't like that, you know. So once I made that connection, it's simple. I think because we're bombarded with toxic food information, and because it's in the culture, we tend to just see it as normal, and so it's very difficult to get to that baseline where there's a lot
of noise, isn't there? I was thinking that this morning. There's so much noise for people that you would have to. Oftentimes, you know, people might not be seeing an improvement, but that's maybe because they've not actually cut out the thing. They've not got to a level of quietness in the background that they can then see, like you say, well, if I have that, then this happens, and I can definitely attribute it to that, whether it's cheese for some people or nuts or whatever it is kind of causing the problem.
Exactly. And I did a very strict elimination diet early on, which was more or less just butter and eggs. And I'd got the idea from Hyperlipid, the blog. And he'd said, Peter on Hyperlipid had said, you can probably live off butter and eggs. And so if you're wanting to do an elimination diet, then that seems to be a good one. And I had for a few weeks, I just had like a really rich omelette in the morning, and then I would have homemade ice cream. So it was just double cream, eggs, and some sweetener. And I felt incredible. And I couldn't believe the mental sharpness that I felt. My energy was high and even all day. I slept really well. My mood was great. And I thought, well, this is incredible, but I'm obviously not going to keep eating just like this forever.
Yeah.
So then I started to introduce things. And
Yeah.
even when you know that you're expecting to find interesting results, it's sometimes hard to accept. Like, for example, cheese or yogurt. I took a long time to say goodbye to that.
Yeah.
Because I think casein is one of the most addictive things there is. And
I think cheese was probably harder to give up than sugar, actually.
For me too.
Yeah.
And I actually had withdrawal symptoms. I used to smoke a lot of cigarettes, and it was harder for me to give up. It sounds mad, but it's harder for me to give up yogurt and cheese than it was for me to give up cigarettes.
How interesting. Yeah. So many addictive substances. And I think I'm quite interested in sugar addiction at the minute, and it people have different things that they can't moderate, or that have that addictive kind of inflammatory kind of property. So that's interesting. Yeah. And there's a lot of crossover. So if we're addicted to one thing, we tend to be addicted to more than one thing. You know, and sugar's definitely often the first drug of addiction for people in life. It's the thing we have access to.
Yeah.
From before we can walk, basically. So it's it has some very powerful pathways there in the brain.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I feel like there's a clear evolutionary advantage to compulsively eating things that will allow you to retain energy. Yeah. Obviously.
Yeah.
But in this environment, unfortunately, we've gamed ourselves. And
yes, totally.
We're being gamed by food companies.
Totally. Yeah.
So I'm trying to be a food company.
There we go. Yeah. That's a good that's a good segue.
was that smooth?
That's really smooth, isn't it? Yeah. So let's talk about Paleo Canteen and how where you are now, how you've got there, and maybe what's coming next.
Sure. Well, as I said, I was studying a physics PhD, and when Ken kind of pointed me towards all this reading, I was completely engrossed, and it actually became harder and harder for me to spend time doing physics, because I felt like what I'd found was more important than what I was doing in my PhD. And so I didn't complete the PhD, and I decided that I would combine my background in food and what I'd found about the nutrition science and start Paleo Canteen. So I didn't know exactly what form it would take, what it would make, what I would do exactly. But I originally started it with a friend of mine who's a chef, and he ended up leaving after a few months, and I took over all the chefing duties at that point. But we thought, okay, we can start with a kind of accessible version of paleo or low carb. So we did a pop-up that sold out in a nice restaurant in Glasgow, and called Cafe Zeke. And Mary, the owner, is a real foodie, and she came along with some of her family, and it was a great night. And we did things like kebabs, koftas, like meze stuff. And the Middle Eastern cuisine really lends itself well to low carb, I think. And that was great. And my original business partner, he knew the general manager of this venue in Glasgow called King Tut's Wawa Hut, which is like a kind of legendary rock and roll venue where Oasis were signed 25 years ago.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's a strange mix, this rock and roll venue and healthy food. But we went in there, we were there for 9 months. We got a really nice review from Joanna Blythman, and that was great. But it felt like its time hadn't quite come yet to be on the high street, you know. Although people were interested and people were traveling from different parts of the country to come, the regular customers were crying out for crowd pleasers like burger and chips and stuff like that. And although I could sort of do that and stick to the paleo or low carb principles, it was getting harder and harder. So I thought, well, I need to work out ways in which I can bring my experience to bear to help other people, but it's not this right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing other pop-up events and stuff at festivals and that kind of thing, and that was good. But I thought, well, this isn't getting to enough people. So at the moment, I'm working on two things. I've teamed up with another very talented chef, John Meehan, he's called, who has done sold out pop-ups in Glasgow now for the last year or so. His handle on Instagram is the mustard spoon, which is a bone in the pig's leg. And
that's a good name.
He used to work for Yotamotolenge, and his ironically as the pastry chef in Noppy, but he eats low carb like me now, and his food is phenomenal. And so we've been writing this cookbook together, and I thought, well, that's a really good way to get out to as many people as possible. And of course, when we met last June at Real Food Rocks, you know, I can't remember if you tried some of our food, but David
definitely
did.
Yeah,
and yeah,
it's delicious.
And thank you. And I was telling David about the cookbook, and he very kindly offered to write a foreword for it. And we also struck a deal with the Public Health Collaboration, which I was so delighted about because I love all the work that PHC does.
Yeah.
That for every book sold, 50p will go to the Public Health Collaboration. So I'm delighted to be supporting them.
Excellent. Are you coming to Real Food Rocks this year?
Absolutely, yes. I believe I'm doing a talk.
Oh, great.
So I'm looking forward to that in Oxford in July.
Yes.
And people will be able to get the book there too.
Yeah, so it's for people who are interested, and if you're watching this before July 2020, it's phcuk.org. I beg your pardon. Public Health Collaboration.
Yeah, and I just think that they've really got the message spot on. I think it's accessible, but at the same time, it's really saying something. And I can only see PHC growing, and I can only see this kind of movement, if you like, growing because it works so well. And I think it's got its detractors, but the problem with slagging off people like David is they've got a proven track record of turning around people's so-called chronic health conditions. Doctors are amongst the most trustworthy people in society. I think you're on a hiding to nothing if you're going to attack them for those kind of incredible results.
That's what we always say. We always say, well, actually, it's really hard to work out what's not to like when people are reversing their diabetes, the cholesterol's coming down, the blood pressure's improving. There's no metric, in the data set that David's been keeping for the last 7 years. We've been doing it now. It's really hard to attack that, and also you get it back in the box because, like you say, you're influencing people you don't even know you're influencing, and then they're influencing other people. It's like a virus, isn't it? Spreading. It's hard to get it back in the box now, I think.
Yes, very much so. So the cookbook for me is a great way of sharing my skills and John sharing his skills and getting that kind of take on low carb out. And the first book is about trying to do it on a budget. So brilliant. I think something that people criticize about it sometimes is that it can cost more, but I don't know if this book tries to challenge that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is this sugar-free ice cream that I'm doing, where it's kind of similar to a few that they have in America, and it's made with double cream, it's made with egg yolk, so there's good stuff in there, and then it's erythritol and stevia. So the two sweeteners, sweeteners cause a little bit of debate about whether they can trigger cravings and stuff like that, but in my experience they can be super helpful, and it's particularly erythritol and stevia. They have basically zero metabolic impact, so they just taste sweet, and then you metabolize them.
Yeah. Ooh, lost you there, I think.
That's cool. Where did we get to?
Yeah, sorry, we lost it there a minute. So we were just saying about sweeteners, and yeah, there's a bit of controversy, isn't there? And I think it's almost like people have to kind of, it's like anything else really. It's like some people can have nuts, some people can have cheese. People have to work that out for themselves. And certainly, I think if people are transitioning into low carb, I think they can have a real place for people to help them, get where they want to be. Other people may suffer from cravings, but that's something you have to personally work out for yourself, I think, isn't it? So you were saying about you metabolize it, and yeah, that's right.
Erythritol and stevia, unlike some sweeteners like say maltitol, they don't have an impact on insulin or
some of them have a terrible effect on your digestion, don't they? I know. Yes. I've been given things at low carb conferences that I wish I hadn't eaten.
Yeah, so xylitol can hasten motility, shall we say?
Let's say that.
And
disaster pants. Yeah.
So there's a fiber called inulin which goes into the ice cream, which can be like too much fiber for people, but it can make you kind of gassy. But I find that it's just like having some fiber, and I love the ice cream. I think it's going to be a great tool for people to use, and I think it'll have wider appeal too, because sugar-free anything is just so much better for your teeth and for all sorts of other things. So I think there'll be appeal outside of the low carb community.
Definitely. I think people are just waking up. They are waking up to sugar now. If you look at kind of world sugar sales, I think there is some evidence, isn't there, that people are waking up to that.
Yeah, the big companies are starting to catch on. Sugar tax, they're responding to that. And I noticed that there's adverts for lower sugar yogurt. There's lower sugar ice cream, not sugar-free like mine, but it's so, I think, whereas fat was the demon for all of my life pretty much, sugar is coming into focus, and people are realizing that fat's not as bad as they thought.
Yeah.
Unless it's a particular type of fat.
Updates, haven't we, from America, that they're actually changing their advice and saying that there isn't any evidence that there's any upper limit of fat intake that's dangerous. So that's good news. Finally.
Absolutely. Yeah, saturated fat. And it's funny how it just seems to blend in to the official story. There's no fanfare, there's no saying,
we got it wrong.
There's none of that. It's like, oh, we always thought this. And there's unfortunately, well, I think nowadays with the internet, there's more credit given to the people who kind of called it out. Perfect example is Ivor Cummins.
Ivor, yeah.
Doing Fat Emperor stuff. The Emperor's New Clothes being the saturated fat causes heart disease, and he's got a great following now. I think you can't put these things back in the box. And I think it's a shame that professional bodies and maybe academics or doctors clinging on to mistaken beliefs about health. It's a shame that they don't do a sort of mea culpa, but it's understandable at the same time, because they've spent their whole professional lives doing it. And I think there's an element of the low carb community which could probably kind of be a bit kinder and tone down some of the jibes or the rhetoric. I think a positive message is what people want to hear 100% of the time.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's how we all fight our battles, and it's lovely that you've chosen to do it in this way of kind of actually, like I say, quietly just feeding people excellent food, which is really nice. And the cookbook, we'll put all the links in the show notes, so that if people want to get the book, then they can do that. Are there any? You mentioned some podcasts and things. Are there any? Who you kind of following at the minute, or anything that you'd recommend for people that's interesting to follow up podcasts, blogs, or books, anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I actually haven't. I don't think I've read. I'm not sure if I've read any books on the subject. There's blogs of people who have books that I've read a lot of, but I'm just going to go into my shortcuts, because it's been a while. I tend to follow podcasts now more than anything, and that would be Ivor's one, the Fat Emperor podcast, and the Low Carb MD podcast is brilliant. I get a lot from doing my podcast, which is called the Canteen podcast, and I've spoken to some people who I feel unworthy to have spoken to, but I think, you know, they are as passionate as about getting the message out as I am. But in terms of blogs,
we'll put the link as well for people to your podcast.
Brilliant, thanks. So Hyperlipid was huge for me, coming from a physics background, because it's unapologetically scientific. So it's not for the faint-hearted. If you want a sort of easy how-to guide, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with, and there's loads of good ones out there, then I would not particularly recommend Hyperlipid. But if you want to understand the deepest mechanics of human physiology, then it's great. And it kind of lays out from almost the origins of life. It's that fundamental, the origins of life, to why saturated fat is an exquisite fuel for the human body. In about 40 posts, there's a thread called Protons. So that is for the nerds. I've devoured all of Andrew Scarborough's blog, which is My Brain Cancer Story.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Bill Lagakos in America, The Poor Misunderstood Calories Proper, I think is the name of his one, Calories Proper. He's a really interesting guy. The Fat Emperor website blog itself is great. It's got those videos with Dr. Kraft, which are fantastic, and all the other videos that he recorded over the years at low carb conferences before it really started to mushroom. Someone who I found extremely fascinating at the start was Weston Price. I think he's the link. Well, he's one of the main links between us and our evolutionary past, because he would visit different cultures around the world in the 1930s and specifically look at cultures that were not tapped into the Western methods of farming. So they weren't eating sugar, refined flour, or veg oil. And he noticed that they were all in rude health, in spite of eating quite a variety of diets, some that were higher in carbs. So it's fascinating. And I think that's, really good evidence that, what you eat is super important.
The evolutionary stuff's really, really interesting, isn't it? There's a guy that we met in Israel. I don't know if you've come across him. He's called Mickey Bandur, and he's actually an archaeologist. So he's another one to watch, because he publishes really interesting papers about how we really sort out the animals that we made extinct were the ones that had the higher proportion of fat in.
Absolutely, and his stuff's great, and I think it's a good counterpoint to Ron Rosedale, who was someone that I was following quite a lot at the start, but he kind of recommends that you keep the protein low, and I think that's not necessary. Probably you might want to hedge your bets, but I think that Mickey Bandur has it more spot on there. So I'm just looking through all this. They're probably the main ones that I started with.
Paul Mason, have you come across him recently? Paul Mason.
Yeah, I've seen some of his talks. I really like him.
Yeah, clever guy. Yeah, good. So loads of things there for people to follow up and have a look at, and I hope that they'll have a look at your recipe book, because I think we can all get a bit stuck in a rut, and it's lovely to see other people's ideas about how you can, particularly kind of meat, with different ways to cook it and present it. And I think that'll be great. That'll be really good. So I really appreciate your time, Ali. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome.
Good luck with everything, with the ice cream and everything, and I'll see you in July.
Thank you. And I just quickly want to say that if people are hearing this before June, when the cookbook's out, they can get a free taster version, and you can put that link in the show notes as well. But thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Ali.
Thanks, Jen.